have a talk about courage, because courage, like faith, is one of those conversations that never ends, because everybody has a different perspective on what the word means. I'm going to talk about the spiritual aspect of courage in terms of you finding unknown layers of yourself. There's a talk we had in the morning, which was, if I can convince you that very close to the surface of your skin, there's a greater version of yourself already. If you were to be sure that that greater version is there, then you could be motivated to do some very brave things. It's always the question, when somebody's trying to move you, they either succeed in convincing you that there is already a greater version of you available or not. So, somebody might take 8 years for promotion. Another person would be shook up by a particular talk and try something and receive that promotion within 3 months. The question is, were the 8 years necessary or not? Sometimes they are, because you're gaining experience. Other times you're waiting because you're not sure whether that greater self is already under your skin or not. That's the real question. So if you think about huge leaders in the world, they had this spiritual certainty that some reality was already there. So then the lieutenants or the generals or the deputies would listen to them, and this leader was so sure that such and such was happening, the generals would just follow, thinking that the leader might know something that I don't know. This is why there's such a small gap between craziness and genius. So Steve Jobs may see the concept of an iPod, whereas a production manager listening to the concept on day one might think this is fantasy. But then if you're speaking as if you're very certain, somebody's bound to follow you. If we talk about the concept of you feeling as if the force is living within you, that right there gives you a kind of aura or charisma. You walk into a room, everybody else is worried except you. When people see that you're not worried, they start to become curious as to why you're not worried. Now, that could either be craziness or you know something that other people don't know. And most exceptional people act as if they have some sort of an invisible association that other people can't see. If you read biographies, like Mahatma Gandhi talks about a liberated India at a time in the first year of the movement when the notion was crazy after 100 years of, colonialization. Same thing with anybody else. Anybody who does anything original, it's as if they're in touch with a vision that other people can't see. One of the bravest things you'll do in your lifetime is to question some of the beliefs that you've inherited from the previous generation. Because you have this part of your mind called the subconscious mind from the time you were born until the age of 7. Everything your parents did, said, and thought was absorbed by you like a sponge. So later at the age of 48, when you encounter a situation that reminds you of a childhood situation, you tend to respond in the original way. This is what yoga calls the conditioned mind. In other words, at the age of 7, you ride a propeller plane and you go through a lot of air bumps. So you get very tense. Years later, if you ride on a propeller plane, you might incite the same original responses. So in order for you to decondition yourself, you have to realize that the second airplane ride has nothing to do with the first airplane ride. Same thing with falling in love, having a child, whatever. If a woman loses the first child, then there's a lot of flags going up when you become pregnant the second time. It's called the conditioned mind. And the conditioned mind keeps us very limited because we keep trying to find something in the past to relate to the present moment, which is unrealistic because this flower is different from the one that was in the flower market yesterday. They look the same, but they're not the same. In terms of courage, other things that take a lot of courage. If you really talk to a lot of people, you see that a couple of things are the scariest things to human beings. I'll count the number of things that are very scary to human beings. Number one, a direct encounter with something that feels like the God force. So an extraordinary moment of some sort, or feeling like you're very much attuned with nature, or Jesus, or something that strikes you as being a great power. The ability to digest that moment of oneness. Even like a woman's child is just born and they hand the baby over to her for the first time and the baby is suckling. Apparently that moment is huge. So how many people can absorb that and digest it without this huge feeling of overwhelm? So the most overwhelming things, number one, some sort of an encounter with the power of the now, the oneness, the God force. Number two, if anybody loves you absolutely unconditionally, it's like the more you are yourself, the more I'm going to love you. It's a non-losing proposition. Somebody says, I love you so much, all you've got to do is unravel to be more and more yourself. It's a complete winning proposition, except if you dislike yourself even 5 degrees and somebody says, I absolutely adore you without any condition, you might want to get rid of them. Because if any idea goes counter to your own self-image, you're going to get defensive. I know in my younger days, if somebody gave me pure love, then that was a little bit different from the way I loved myself. Mine had conditions on it. So if somebody came forth in a very pure way, it was a bit overwhelming. So number one, absorbing God. Number two, absorbing a kind of love with no hidden agenda. It's like, even if you decide to leave me, I will always love your soul. Very overwhelming. As a matter of fact, in some of these workshops, sometimes I give somebody a hug with no agenda. And then you see half the audience starts to cry. It's nothing sad. But if people see any sign of unconditional love, they get very emotional. The question is, why? There must be something wrong with 8 billion people's concepts of self-worth. Why would you get emotional seeing unconditional love? Why wouldn't you say, well, as a daughter of God, that's the way I was created? Why not? The third thing that's tough to handle but much easier than the first two is money. So some of you might not change one bit if you suddenly make 400 million euros. Some of you might change completely. Jeroen is smiling, so he's going to change a lot.
Just a notion resonates. Was he still in the picture? What's the second?
Yes. All right. Now, speaking about courage, some of you are very, very certain that love is completely wild. Some of us don't know that. In other words, what are your ways of trying to control love? So, like in my part of the world, men try to marry much younger women. And when you ask them why, they say, well, I'm going to form her. And of course, it never works. Because he winds up losing his teeth and she's still gorgeous, so she just finds another one. So he thinks that he's formed her. Actually, I had a complaint from a client in the Middle East. She said, what did you do? to my life. And I said, how come? He said, I married a 19-year-old canary and you turned her into an eagle with these self-confidence classes. So he didn't want an eagle. He wanted his songbird. But that's control. In essence, you can't control love. You're going to lose that control. So are you courageous enough to say, okay, I'm going to grow with her, and if she happens to outgrow me, we'll try to grow together, but nothing's guaranteed. That scares people. The idea of abandonment comes. And then as soon as you try to own somebody, you've already started losing them. I mean, the marriage contract can be in the drawer, but the moment the two of you stop growing together, then essentially the quality of that love has changed. So imagine how challenging that is. You meet each other at 22, you're both growing and you're not controlling. The issue is, can we both grow? Another problem with these types of classes, if one of you comes to the class and not the other, then one of you may take off and shed some layers of skin and discover more of who you are. The other one is not doing the same. So then it becomes very problematic. How does one member of a couple grow while the other one is resisting? It's very painful to the teachers because they're not trying to break up a relationship. But see, when your mind starts to open, you're going to change. You won't be able to stop it. This is an issue with consciousness. Consciousness says once you see a truth, you can't close your eyelids to it anymore. So if you have one real experience of worthiness, you can never pretend that you haven't seen yourself as worthy. That one memory will stick. This is the problem, I'm saying as a joke, this is a problem with consciousness. You cannot take consciousness away. Once it's achieved, it's achieved. Other concepts of courage, another concept of courage, having the courage to invest in other people so that hopefully they'll invest back in you. You're not doing this as a guaranteed business deal, okay? You just have the type of faith where you want to invest in other people's well-being, and the theory is that everything you give out comes back to you, so you spend a life uplifting other people in any manner that's fit for you. It could be social entrepreneur, it could be eye doctor, it could be elementary school teacher. Do you spend time investing in other people? And then of course that has to be done with your heart. In other words, with all of your heart and soul, you are investing in other human beings, animals and plants. And then see how things come back to you. Speaking of courage, courage is not something intuitive. You have to build it. One of the people I admire and I study up on is Mahatma Gandhi, and that person definitely had to build up courage. In other words, he got hit several times in the resistance, and my feeling is that he was building up courage to see how far this can go. Probably the same thing with Nelson Mandela, same thing with Mother Teresa, same thing with Napoleon Bonaparte. It's a muscle that you must develop. A lot of people think that courage means never being scared. If you talk to courageous people, they'll say, no, you have it wrong. Actually, Martin Luther King had one vision of himself being shot. He was about to go to sleep one night, and he had the vision of being assassinated. And then the following day, he made a speech. He said, I went to the other side already. And because I've seen the other side, I'm now a lot freer to go on with my work. Because as long as we're afraid of death, then we're never going to be completely courageous. So he had a very real experience of being killed in his mind. So when he came back, he was a freer man. So courageousness is not being fearless. I think these people just learn to have fear, look fear in the eyes, see through it as a paper monster, and then move on. What I encourage all friends to do, make an acquaintance out of fear and worry. Because fear and worry, it's like a liar living inside your skull. In other words, if you were to write your memoirs from kindergarten up till today, if you wrote down the situation that worried you from kindergarten until now, you would see that at least 95% of your predictions were all wrong. Every time you got worried, you hardly ever predicted the outcome in an exact manner. So this is very discouraging, because from kindergarten until the year 2017, you have been